On the war-ravaged moon of Carax 9, beneath the steel sky laced with smoke and the distant rumble of artillery, a group of alien mercenaries gathered in the stone-cold barracks of Outpost Gamma. The air was thick with sweat, oil, and the scent of fear masked beneath bravado. Young Graxan recruits stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching worn plasma rifles, listening as Commander Hrel barked orders in his usual harsh tone. The mission was clear: storm the rebel stronghold by dawn, wipe out resistance, and secure the due territory for the coalition. But then, as Hrel scanned the mission tablet, his face changed. The screen flashed red, and the command room's low hum fell silent as the commander muttered a name with visible dread. Earthborn units. Every movement froze. The younger soldiers glanced around, puzzled, while the veterans stared at each other without a word. A heavy silence pressed down like a collapsing wall. One of the older mercs, a Driloxi sniper with cybernetic eyes, quietly stood and left without explanation. Even Hrel closed the tablet slowly and cleared his throat, but whatever words he meant to say never came. Torque, a young Graxan soldier barely out of training, turned to his squad mate Vel with confusion. "What are Earthborn units?" he whispered, but Vel didn't answer, just kept staring at the now blank screen with a clenched jaw. The tension didn't fade after the briefing ended. It worsened. Whispers spread like infection in the mess hall. Old stories, half-remembered. War reports, rumors from failed campaigns. Earthborn, they said, weren't like other humans. They weren't diplomats, they weren't colonists. They were soldiers bred for impossible battles, shadows that walked through fortified zones and made armies vanish. Torque had always believed those were just stories told to scare new recruits, until now. He caught one of the older officers staring at a burn mark on the side of his helmet, touching it like a wound that never healed. That night, unable to sleep, Torque wandered into the archive room, a dusty, flickering vault of old battle records. He searched Earthborn and found only a few files, many corrupted, most locked. One video played. It showed grainy footage of a night assault on a desert outpost. Alien mercs like him firing into the darkness, then silence, then figures emerging from the smoke. Tall, armored, their faces hidden behind black visors. No return fire, no shouts. Just precise movements and flashes of white light as weapons were disabled and soldiers dropped without a sound. Then the screen cut to black. Torque leaned back, heart thudding. None of it made sense. Why would hardened mercs be afraid of humans? And why had Hrel ended the briefing without giving new orders? The next morning, the atmosphere was wrong. The supply crew was late. Outer patrols hadn't checked in. A scout team sent to recon the canyon went dark 2 hours earlier, and now a cold wind carried strange static across the comms. Still, no one said the words out loud, but everyone knew. Earthborn, they had landed. The outpost's defense grid hadn't detected entry. No gunships, no warning. It was as if the humans had walked straight through the walls. Torque, now assigned to bunker security, watched as Threx, a retired general-turned-consultant, arrived unexpectedly. His armor was scorched, his right arm cybernetic, and his voice a growl carved from too many wars. When Torque asked him about the Earthborn units, Threx didn't speak at first. He simply stared across the horizon and said, "We don't fight ghosts." That was it. No details, no tactics, just those 5 words. Later, Torque overheard 2 command officers arguing. One insisted they fortify the walls, increase drone surveillance, and prepare for combat. The other shook his head and said, "It won't matter. You can't stop them. You just survive them, if they let you." That evening, the moon's second sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the outpost. The quiet became unbearable. Torque stood at his post, eyes fixed on the outer fence, scanning for movement. He saw nothing, but the stillness itself felt unnatural, as if something watched from just beyond sight. Then his comm crackled, only static, and a single phrase cut through, distorted and cold: "Prepare to evacuate." No call sign, no source. Just that. And as the outpost's lights flickered and the shadows grew deeper, Torque realized the real battle hadn't even started yet. It had already ended the moment someone said the name Earthborn. Torque couldn't stop thinking about the footage he had seen, and the fear in General Threx's voice echoed in his mind like a ghost that refused to leave. The Earthborn had arrived, but they hadn't attacked. Not yet. The silence felt worse than 1,000 bombs. The next morning, the outpost was on high alert, but not because of orders, because of dread. Patrols were now going missing more often. No gunfire, no signs of struggle, just static-filled comms and empty coordinates. Torque joined a maintenance crew under the pretense of helping repair surveillance drones, but he had a plan. He wanted access to deeper files, the kind locked away from standard troops. He found an old terminal buried in the west wing of the base, half-functional, forgotten, and slow. Still, it worked. Using a bypass chip he had bought from a retired Brelic technician, he broke into the restricted logs. What he found made his blood run cold. There were incident reports from other planets, dozens of them, all tagged with the same hidden code. EB-class presence suspected. One file detailed the fall of Black Ice Station, a mining outpost in deep space. It had been defended by nearly 500 mercenaries, many well-armed and battle-tested. The recording began with normal routines: patrol check-ins, cargo shipments, weather scans. Then came the disruption. Cameras caught dark shapes moving between towers. Too fast, too quiet. Drones went blind one by one, as if they were being swallowed by the night. Footage showed soldiers firing blindly, their bullets hitting nothing. Moments later, the internal systems collapsed. Life support failed, lights blinked out, and a message played through every speaker in the station. Evacuate immediately. This facility is no longer under your control. There were no visuals of the attackers, just shadows. The final frame before blackout showed the command room door swinging open, and then static. No bodies were ever recovered. Torque sat back, in silence, his claws shaking slightly over the keyboard. The Earthborn didn't come to kill. They came to erase. He began collecting whispered accounts from older mercenaries. One, a scarred Draloxi named Ramal, told Torque of a battlefield where time itself seemed to slow the moment the humans arrived. "We shot first," Ramal said, "and we never got the chance to shoot again." Another merc spoke of weapon systems, locking up the instant an Earthborn unit was detected. Nothing electronic survived contact. Torque wondered, how did they do it? Was it advanced technology, mind control, or something else entirely? At night, dreams of featureless black helmets haunted him, and he started seeing reflections in windows where no one stood. Even the other Graxan soldiers noticed. "You're obsessed," Vel said, but Torque didn't answer. He knew obsession wasn't the right word. It was fear, cold, creeping fear that didn't leave you, even in sleep. Then came the emergency. Alert. A fleet had entered orbit, but it didn't fire. It didn't even register on standard scanners. Only an old deep scan unit in the lower bay caught their signal. Silent, precise, coded. Earthborn ships had arrived. The mercenaries scrambled, confused by the lack of orders. Torque rushed to the command room and found Threx alone, staring at a blank screen. "They're here," Threx whispered. "I can feel it." No alarms sounded, no walls shook. But across the outpost, systems began to flicker and die. The communications room lost signal. Sentry guns stopped responding. Drones crashed in midair like birds hit by an invisible force. One squad sent to the West Ridge vanished in less than 3 minutes. Their final report was a scream, and then silence. Threx made a rare announcement over the base loudspeaker. "Stand down. Do not engage." But it was too late for many. One unit had already opened fire on what they believed was a human scout team. Their weapons failed instantly, and the squad disappeared within seconds. Only one soldier made it back, trembling and unable to speak, his helmet cracked and eyes staring into nothing. Torque sat on the roof that night, watching the stars and waiting for something. Anything. But the sky remained calm. The Earthborn didn't bomb from above. They didn't threaten. They waited. And that was the worst part. Waiting, knowing they were out there, walking through shadows, watching. The silence was not peaceful. It was controlled. Torque finally understood why. The veterans spoke in whispers, and why even hardened killers feared a name. Because Earthborn weren't legends. They were real. And they were close. The sky above Karax 9 was a dull gray when Torque was sent out with a recon squad to search the southern trenches, where the last patrol had gone silent just hours before. The wind carried fine ash and static through the air, and even the hardened soldiers beside him moved with caution rather than confidence. The path ahead was twisted with broken fences and burned-out drones, but no bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing but scorched footprints that stopped suddenly in the dirt as if those who made them had vanished mid-step. Torque gripped his rifle, tighter, eyes scanning the ruins while the squad leader, a tall Dreloxy with a plasma lance, barked orders in a sharp whisper. They moved slowly, one step at a time, through trenches filled with the smell of overheated metal and something colder, something unnatural. Every few meters their comms fizzled with bursts of static, and their scanners blinked on and off as though something was jamming them from nearby but just out of reach. Then, near the edge of a bombed-out relay station, they found it, a disabled drone, still smoking slightly. It hadn't been destroyed by an explosion or weapon fire. Its casing had been carefully opened, wires removed one by one, no signs of violence, no trace of a fight. Torque knelt beside it, running a finger over the smooth-cut lines, and a cold shiver ran through his spine. Whoever had done this knew exactly where to strike, and they had done it without being seen. Before anyone could speak, a thick fog rolled in, too sudden and too dense to be natural. It poured into the trench like water spilling down a drain, hiding everything beyond a few feet. The squad froze, rifles raised, and the squad leader activated a flare. The light pushed back the fog only slightly, casting eerie shadows on the broken walls. Then, out of the smoke, shapes appeared. Tall, silent, unmoving. Figures in matte black armor with no visible weapons and no markings, their helmets smooth, and featureless except for a faint glow where their eyes should be. The squad leader shouted a warning and opened fire, and the others followed instinctively, but the shots went wild, missing every target despite the short distance. It wasn't panic. It was something else, like their aim was being pulled away. Torque tried to fire too, but his rifle shut down with a low beep. He looked down and saw his HUD flickering, every system crashing one by one until his visor went black. When he looked up again, one of the black-armored figures was right in front of him. No movement, no sound, just standing there, staring. Torque stumbled back, heart pounding, ready to run, but then the figure lifted its arm and tapped something on its wrist. Instantly, every remaining weapon in the squad powered down with a synchronized click. A voice echoed in Torque's helmet, not from the outside, but injected directly into his comms. No engagement, no casualties. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. The smoke began to clear, and the Earthborn units stepped back into the mist. Without a word, Torque's squad was stunned, frozen where they stood, unsure if they were alive by mercy or design. The Dreloxy leader lowered his weapon slowly, his hand shaking, eyes wide with disbelief. "They let us live," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Torque couldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. They had been outmatched, outsmarted, and outplayed in seconds, not by force but by presence. As the squad returned to base, the silence followed them. No one spoke during the march back, not even when asked what had happened. Torque kept thinking of the way the Earthborn moved, not like soldiers but like surgeons, precise and calm. Back at the outpost, Threx demanded a report. The squad leader gave only one sentence: "Contact made, no resistance given, no resistance possible." Threx nodded slowly, then turned away with a heavy sigh, as if he'd known what would happen all along. That night, as Torque lay in his bunk, unable to sleep, he wondered what the Earthborn wanted. They didn't take land, they didn't kill, and they didn't speak unless they had to. They had come through smoke and silence, left a message, without words, and vanished again. Torque knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The real story, he realized, was not in the weapons they used, or the battles they won. It was in how they made even the fiercest mercenaries question whether fighting back was worth it at all. Torque sat in the command center, staring at the dim glow of inactive monitors while low power hummed through the base like a heartbeat waiting to stop. The silence had become louder than sound, and no one on Karax 9 dared to speak about what had happened in the southern trenches. Reports were being filed, yes, but most of them were blank, filled with coded phrases like brief contact and unknown interference, hiding the truth because the truth made people panic. The Earthborn hadn't killed anyone, hadn't fired a shot, yet their message had been clear. This was not your ground anymore. Since then, every soldier moved slower, spoke less, and watched shadows even in daylight. Torque felt it most of all, a heavy pressure that followed him through corridors and dreams. Even Threx, who had once stormed command halls like a storm made of armor and growls, now walked as if afraid to draw attention. One morning, Torque received a summon from the archive chamber, a deep-level vault few were ever allowed to enter. He passed through layers of clearance, retinal scans, voice prints, and DNA keys, until a final steel door opened with a hiss. Inside, the walls were lined with forgotten data cores, some too old to identify, all covered in frost from broken coolant lines. A woman stood waiting, Dr. Salai, the Coalition's chief xenohistorian, a name spoken in whispers even before the Earthborn appeared. She motioned for silence, handed Torque a small data shard, and gestured to a playback table. As the projection started, a soft voice filled the room, calm, clear, emotionless. Doctrine file. Earthborn contact. Authorized eyes only. The file began with a grainy image of a battlefield on a distant world, long before Karax 9. Dead. Machines lay in piles, but not a single body in sight. The voice continued, explaining how the Earthborn were once part of a failed peacekeeping experiment. Humans modified not with rage or weaponry, but with pure strategy, silence, and systems, designed to end conflict before it began. They remove warfare. By becoming the absence of it, the voice said, they are trained not to fight battles, but to unmake them. The Earthborn had no standard army, no central command, no need for glory or fame. They operated alone or in small teams embedded, with codes and tools unknown even to high-level Coalition scientists. Their greatest weapon was fear, not the wild kind, but the quiet one that made people freeze before pulling a trigger. The doctrine explained something else, too. Earthborn did not act without purpose. Every appearance was a message, every silence an order. If they are here, Salai said quietly after the playback ended, then something larger is moving behind the curtain. She showed Torque another file, one that had been auto-locked for years. It detailed a forgotten mission, codename project. Stillwater, in which an entire city vanished overnight. Not destroyed, erased. The final signal from that city was a short pulse of sound. A single note, like breath exhaled through a flute, repeated 3 times. Torque recognized it instantly. It was the sound he had heard in his comms just before the trench contact. Panic gripped him slowly. He asked Salai if Earthborn were targeting the outpost, but she shook her head. They don't target, she said. They correct. That word stuck in Torque's mind like a splinter. What were they correcting here? Later, in the mess hall, soldiers spoke less than ever. The story of the trench encounter had spread anyway, growing stranger with each retelling. Some said the Earthborn floated. Others swore their eyes changed shape, but none of them could explain why they had lived. In the center of it all, Torque watched, thinking not of battles, but of the strange calm in the Earthborn's presence, the feeling that resistance was pointless, not because of fear, but because of design. That night, the base's outer sensors failed again, this time for 5 whole minutes. When they returned, nothing had changed, visibly. But the next morning, 3 high-ranking officers had packed and left without notice, their files deleted from the system. No one mentioned it, not even Thrax. When Torque confronted him privately, the old general looked tired and old in a way Torque had never seen. They were warned, Thrax said. They chose not to listen. He opened a drawer and handed Torque a small badge, worn, old, and clearly human. It bore a symbol Torque had never seen before, a triangle broken by a horizontal line. "That was given to me by an Earthborn," Threx said. "Not during a battle, during a ceasefire. He told me to carry it in case I ever forgot the cost of ignoring silence." Torque turned the badge over in his hand. It felt heavy, too heavy, for its size. He asked what the cost was. Threx looked toward the door, toward the hallway filled with eyes that refused to look back. "They don't erase cities," he said. "They erase noise." The words made no sense, until Torque realized what the doctrine meant. Earthborn units didn't just end battles, they ended the causes behind them. Anyone who pushed too far, shouted too loud, or threatened balance became a target, not for death, but for removal from the story entirely. A clean slate, a reset. The doctrine of silence was not peacekeeping, it was control by deletion. And now, they were here on Carax 9. Not because of a war, but because something, or someone, had made too much noise. Torque woke to alarms, not loud ones, but soft pulses that came in steady waves through his bunk's emergency system. Warning of a breach, not on the outer wall, but in the command sector itself, something that had never happened before. He threw on his armor and rushed out. But as he moved through the corridors, he noticed the lights dimmer than usual, the hum of machines slower, and the silence of footsteps from others who should have been awake by now. When he reached the command room, the main screen was filled with static and a message blinked in pale green text. System paused, wait. Threx was already inside, but not pacing or shouting. Instead, he stood frozen in front of the screen, face pale, breathing quiet, as if trying not to disturb whatever presence had taken hold of the outpost. "They're not attacking," Threx said when Torque asked what was going on. "They're watching." That made Torque uneasy. He looked around for signs of sabotage, weapons drawn, anything to indicate a normal threat. But there was nothing, no enemy, no sign of a breach, just this strange sense that the entire outpost was under observation by something that didn't need doors to enter. Then the power dropped completely, plunging the room into darkness except for backup strips along the walls, and for a long minute, neither man moved. A low sound filled the room next, not a siren, not static, but that same three-note tone Torque had heard before in the comms, soft, emotionless, deliberate. And when it ended, a panel on the far wall opened slowly on its own, revealing a narrow corridor that hadn't been there before. Threx and Torque looked at each other, and the general nodded grimly. "This is it," he said. "The test." Torque didn't understand, but followed as Threx led them down the corridor, the walls smooth, unfamiliar and completely silent beneath their boots. At the end, they entered a round chamber glowing with pale blue light. In the center stood a tall figure in black armor, unmoving, waiting, not holding a weapon, not threatening, just watching. Torque reached for his rifle, but Threx stopped him. "This isn't a fight," the general whispered. "It's a measure." As they stepped forward, a projection formed in the air beside the Earthborn unit. Footage of battles, old records from across the galaxy, but each one centered on leaders who made decisions that pushed too far, cost too many lives, and sparked chaos beyond control. Each one ended with the same phrase flashing across the screen: "Noise eliminated." Then the projection changed. It showed Carax 9. Footage of the outpost, of Threx shouting at command meetings, of patrols sent too deep, of mercenary deals made off record, of operations that hadn't been approved by Coalition Command. The Earthborn didn't speak, but Torque understood. They were showing proof. Not of attack, but of disorder, the kind their doctrine was built to erase. Threx stood taller, unafraid. "You've come to decide," he said. "So do it." Torque turned to him, confused. Threx didn't resist. He was offering himself as the cause, as the noise. The Earthborn unit raised its hand, tapped something on its wrist, and a soft pulse filled the room. For a moment, everything blurred. Torque felt his thoughts slow, his memories flicker, and when it ended, Threx was gone. No pain, no sound, just gone, as if he had never been there. Torque fell to his knees, shaken, unsure if what he saw was real. Then the Earthborn unit turned to him. Another projection played, this time showing Torque's choices, his hesitations, his desire to understand instead of attack. And when the file ended, nothing happened. The unit stepped back, the corridor reopened, and Torque was alone again. He returned to the command center, now relit, fully powered, and found no mention of threats in any system. His files, history, name, erased. No one remembered him, only Torque. That was the test. Fear wasn't just about battle. It was about whether you created chaos or calmed it, whether you added noise or helped end it. The Earthborn didn't destroy, they refined. And Torque now understood. Survival wasn't about strength. It was about silence. News of Threx's disappearance spread through Karax 9 like fire through dry brush, but no one said his name aloud. Not because they feared punishment, but because, deep inside, they couldn't remember exactly who he was anymore, as if something had reached into their minds and carefully snipped away the threads that connected him to the present. Only Torque remembered, and even his memory felt strange now, like trying to hold on to smoke with bare hands. The Earthborn had erased a man without a shot, without a fight, and that silent removal was more terrifying than any weapon the Mercenaries had ever faced. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the base changed. Mercenaries who had once strutted through the corridors with arrogance now whispered in corners, eyes darting to every flickering shadow. Orders were followed without question, but not out of respect, out of fear. Patrols shortened. Missions were delayed. The bravest fighters began asking questions they'd never asked before. Who's really in charge? Why hasn't Coalition Command responded? Where are the Earthborn now? No one knew the answers, but they all shared the same instinct, to leave before they too became part of the silence. One morning, without a signal, a dozen ships lifted from the southern landing pads. No authorization, no clearance, just gone. Within hours, more followed. Entire units, some of the deadliest alien mercenaries in the sector, packed their gear and vanished into the gray sky, too afraid to stay, too proud to explain why. They didn't need to say it. The Earthborn had arrived, and staying on this cursed rock was no longer worth the pay. Torque watched the exodus from the top of the comm tower, his hands gripping the railing as another gunship lifted off. It wasn't chaos. It was surrender. A quiet surrender by soldiers who had never known fear until now. Inside the operations center, Dr. Salai was collecting data cores and locking down old files. When Torque asked where she was going, she simply said anywhere that's not here, then added, when Earthborn appear, they're not visiting. They're preparing. That phrase stuck in Torque's head as he walked the halls, now mostly empty, the echo of his own footsteps louder than anything else. He passed bunk rooms with beds still warm, lockers left open, maps torn from walls as if the war they had come to fight no longer mattered. He saw no enemies, no gunfire, just the eerie weight of a war that had ended before it began. In one hangar, he found an abandoned transport half-loaded with crates marked for Earthfront delivery. Inside one of them was an old helmet, Coalition issue, outdated tech, and carved on the side were the words, if they come, don't speak, don't fight, don't stay. That was the message passed in whispers across stars, the warning that turned battles into retreats before the first shot. Torque understood now why alien mercs across the galaxy went quiet at the mention of Earthborn units, not because they were beaten, but because they were rewritten, not killed, removed from history, erased so cleanly that no song or story would remember their name. The final night on Karax 9 came without alarms or fire, just a long silence as the remaining soldiers boarded their ships. Torque stayed behind a little longer, walking the perimeter alone. He felt them watching, not from behind walls or turrets, but from somewhere deeper, beneath the noise, behind the veil of war itself. Earthborn didn't claim territory. They didn't wave flags or hold ground. They were sentinels of balance, moving only when the universe grew too loud. And now the silence had returned. Torque made his way to the launch bay at dawn. Only one shuttle remained, its engines cold, frost climbing its landing struts. As he prepared for departure, he looked Back once more at the base, abandoned, hollow, forgotten before its story even reached the stars. No battle had been fought here. No medals would be given. Just an empty name on a forgotten report. He lifted off without ceremony, the silence of space swallowing the roar of engines. As the planet shrank behind him, he whispered to no one. Now I understand. Earthborn weren't myths. They were the editors of reality, and in their presence, even the strongest warriors chose silence over legacy.